Come on, Keith. It's okay. We're going to be 56 minutes, but you're still going to get 500 minutes worth of value, Keist dog. Keisty McKeist. Come on, Keist. It's okay. What do you say?
You're just confirming everything's good.
Okay. So let's get into the best fitness tests for athletes. I stole like 10 pens this morning from the bank. So how's everybody going? How's everybody doing? Best fitness test for athletes, and how unique this is the week of or after the combine. I do enjoy watching some of the combine results. I like seeing the six sweatshirt. We got Alex Rose. So Alex Rose has tested. Alex, I want to know for you personally, did you test your back squat, or were you old and you had to cry about it? I actually just tested my Ramblers complain about the volume here, Jason. I don't know if that's accurate. I just beat Tamand actually in our little jump off. And I think that when we're looking at athleticism and best fitness tests, it's like, okay, what are the first you went to a physical? Yes, I did actually. Sorry. What are the first qualities that we want to look at? I think when we're looking at qualities, Andrew, I sort of had to anyway. Qualities that I want to see if we just break down impulse right off the bat. If I'm looking at impulse, right, I want to think about what's going to go into force. We're going to look at peak velocity, average velocity, rate of force development. Those are going to play that major impact on impulse. And then the time frame. Okay, so then if we're looking at the time frame, how quickly do we have to apply things? Okay, so that's like one of the first ways that I look at athleticism. Then we can think about, okay, what are we coordinating? What's the regime of muscular work, as the definition of dynamic correspondence might be something that we might be looking at. So then we can start to think about, all right, if we are looking at qualities that determine athleticism, an individual should be able to recruit at high speeds. Banks have free perks that saves the company. Like, yeah, exactly. Solidarity, agreed. So then if we're looking at things like rate of force development, another thing would be like how much force over a long period of time can someone apply. Then we're going to look at something like, okay, how much can an individual, or how well can an individual do multiple strength qualities at once? So I actually think about like this is an interesting one. Take like a badminton player, like how much force can they apply, almost like somewhat backwards, right? So if you think about a squash player, or to a point even in badminton, they will play backwards to a point. How much force can they apply while moving backwards? How much speed can they apply? And then jump at the same time. So that's going to be some of the simple qualities that we look at. But then we also have to bring in some other qualities. Would be like, how well can someone apply this force or this speed or this rate of coordination when they're fatigued? So if we're looking at impulse, right, and impulse is going to be made up of peak velocity, average velocity, rate of force development. Okay, so how can they? What is their average velocity in a brief period, in the snapshot? What is their peak velocity in a snapshot when they're under a lot of fatigue? If they're under a lot of fatigue, that can have that negative impact on their impulse if they're not as athletic, or if they're not as well prepared. And so in my mind, those are some big qualities. We've got to look at rate of force development. We've got to look at how the body communicates and how well they coordinate through various ranges of motion. We got to look at simple terms for us that we've used: blast impulse, sustained impulse, absolute strength methods, sustained endurance, okay, classical endurance. These are all the real simple methods that we use for quality determination with strength characteristics. Okay, so then the next thing, okay, so what tests can we use to test this specific individual if we're looking at just straight strength, just straight up strength? And I did want to bring out, this is probably one of one of my favorite books as far as like an old school book. I want to see when this is from. I think it's the early 2000s that I've used as like a baseline to sort of build everything off of. And so just as a quick aside, dude, some of the tests in here are absolutely freaking awesome. Okay, 2000 this is from. So, you know, some of this stuff in here that blood lactate, transition thresholds, love this. Dude, some of this stuff is so freaking cool. And this is from 2000, and we still think this is like brand new in 2024. You know, Total Running Productions is probably going to do a video on their 7th video on Jakob Ingebrigtsen does brand new testing method of lactate threshold training. Meanwhile, said book talks about this in the year 2000. Anyone ever see the old Conan O'Brien skit of the year 2000 in the year 2000? We should use that. Anyway, I'm going to go back on topic here, on task. If we're looking at, you know, taking a book like this, right? I'll look at that. I'll read these books. I'll break them down. And then I try to synthesize everything that they're saying at a complex level so that we can comprehend them for strength coaches. And then we can start to apply it here at Garage Strength. And so in this case, you know, if we're looking at like a test to use to test an athlete's strength, something as simple as like a 3-rep back squat, a 5-rep back squat, you know, a 3-rep or a 5-rep single leg squat. So right now, this week is Big 12 weeks. It's Big 12 week for South Dakota State's wrestling team. This week, Big 12s, okay? They send 10 guys to Big 12s. The rest of the team, we're testing their 5K. That's not strength, though. We're testing their single leg squat, their bench, their maximum pull-up, then their rep out pull-up. Then we're testing their front squat, their back squat, their cleans, okay? So if we're looking at strength, really straight up strength, that's where we might look at something that would be rate of force development, and the time frame will be a little bit longer. So the impulse will be high, but not as high as, say, a plyometric movement. So the plyometric movement might be a little bit more complex at a higher speed. The absolute strength movement is going to show us like, okay, this is that first step. This is really where we can see like how well does this person then, if we test their front squat, if we test their back squat, if we test their single leg squat, if we test their bench press, or we test their pull-up, how much force over a longer period of time can they produce? Okay, then we go, okay, the next step, that's over here. Then the next step would be, okay, now let's look at things that are going to test their athleticism. So let's test their 10-yard sprint. Let's test their vertical. Let's test their broad jump. Let's test their depth jump to a broad. Okay, let's test their 5-10-5. Okay, that's going to be some really good things that are going to show us indicators of their athleticism. Can they snatch or not? Okay, some of those things now we can start to play around with, and then we can use the feedback from the strength test. Then we can look at their athleticism, and then we can build out this, you know, what we would sort of call as this athlete profile, and that helps us build that out. So one thing I did want to bring up is, you know, a lot of people will use like a force velocity curve, and I've been getting into that stuff a little bit more in the sense that if force and velocity are part of the same measurement, or why is it a force velocity curve? And I want somebody to try and answer that for me. So if we think about the momentum force relationship, and if we look at the force and velocity, you know, velocity being part of force, if one goes up, the other one's going to go up. Now, that doesn't change the fact that we might train a specific way on the spectrum, but and the person who's sort of getting me to think this way is I've been reading some of the books from Dan Cleather and listening to some of his podcasts, so now I'm realizing, like, you know, not that the force velocity curve is worthless, but I think that there needs to be some clarification, and that's sort of what we're trying to do now with the strength test into the athleticism test, and then finally, when we start to break down when should we use these tests to get the most benefit. Okay, so, you know, the NFL Combine is essentially determined timeline because there's about an 8 to 10 week period between the end of the season for the NCAA season to the Combine period to then the or the NFL draft. Okay, so if the NFL draft is set up for you to essentially review what are the pro day performances, what are the combine performances, that helps you. So that's a good time to set these tests up. Now, the other thing is that a lot of colleges will do their first 6 to 8 week prep period after the season, and then they'll test before spring break. So they'll test a back squat, they'll test a clean, and they're only really doing about 6 to 8 weeks of preparation before they test. Then they go home for spring break, and then after spring break, now they'll do another prep period, and then they'll test the shuttle, they'll test the 40. So that's another way that this ends up being used in the football situation, in the football example. So then when we go further, if we're looking at, something like a sport, let's say a sport like throwing. Okay, so what we've done is we'll test when the season of preparation begins again, let's say beginning of September. Then we'll go 12 weeks, we test again. Then we'll go right before the outdoor season begins, which is where we're at right now, and we test it again. So we'll test those 3 times. And so if we can test those 3 times, then that sort of tells us where we're going to be going into when we're going into the season for track and field. We know where we're at. We know how to peak. We know what numbers we should be using for our peak, so that we have have a good sense of where everything is as the season progresses. And I think that that's some of the important stuff here. Is like one of the things I learned from Dave Tate when I went out to Elite FTS and I did that the podcast with him was like, a lot of these coaches, first of all, they don't have benchmarks, but then they don't even use those benchmarks to determine their future training. And I think that that's some of the big aspects here is like, for us, we'll end up using these tests, let's say when outside of the micro situation, but also on the macro positioning, when an athlete comes in the door, we're going to test them. We're going to see how they do. After, let's say 16 weeks, we're going to test them again. And if we can do that repeatedly, now we can use those tests as a guide on when they get from like novice level to intermediate level. And then when they get from intermediate level to elite level, now the training will change based off those tests and when they're being done, and based off the strength characteristics for their sport. And a lot of that goes back to information that we're pulling from books like this. Okay, so that's like stuff that we've just got to think about when we're laying out all these tests and when we're looking at something like the combine, how the combine can be used for a large amount. Also just remember, like, these football teams invest a large amount of money into these players. So to get the players, the best out of the players, or get the right players for the situations that the teams are in, they've got to use these tests to determine, what type of financial investment they're going to be making. So I think when we're actually like looking at the combine, we don't really think that way. We're not thinking like, okay, they're testing these athletes for this reason because they're going to make massive financial investments and they're trying to get a return, and then they're doing that with the puzzle piece of their current team. And so that's honestly like a good way to think about it for yourselves as athletes or as coaches is like, okay, the puzzle piece of if I was an athlete still, okay, think about if I'm still an athlete and we're using these tests, right? I'm taking that test and I'm going to go through a squat or a clean or a snatch or a vertical jump or a depth drop into a broad jump or a 40 or a 10, or a power snatch, anything like that, right? We're going to use these tests for me, if I'm the athlete, to determine where I'm at in the puzzle of my career, and then how that training will communicate to me, okay, now this is my test, and if my goal is to get here, I need to start increasing my training, or I need to squat more, I need to bench more, I need to snatch more, I need to sprint more, whatever that might be. It's going to educate so that I can make an investment into specific exercises where I'm weak, so I make that investment so that I can then have those improvements based off of prior athletes and based off of prior results that are educating the entire system. And that's really what we've got to be thinking about when we're taking these tests and what that information is going to tell us. So now I want to get into some of these benchmarks and these records that we saw this past weekend at the combine and what we've seen even overall, and then go into that sort of just break it down a little bit, but then also I want to go into I've got some research papers here where we're going to talk about maximum velocity for the 40. Is it necessary, or is it more about acceleration? And then training methods to improve your vertical jump. So if you've got a problem, if you have a problem right around improving the vertical jump, immediately you're going to see, there's going to be an immediate feedback. I was just getting confused by one of Keith's questions there, but let's go into this here.
Nah, I'm not hunted. Everybody's just been curious about how fast.
Okay,
I can
so
run the
Christian
40.
Coleman's here. This is when he was at Tennessee.
She's up there, finish line. And I'm
This
gonna
is
get
right
there first.
before he just won the indoor world title in the 60. So he ran a 4.12. Who was his coach back then? Was it Ken? I'm trying to think if his coach was Ken Harding or if Ken. I think Ken had coached him. But just think about that.
Nah, I'm not hunted.
the difference
Everybody's
with
just been curious about how fast I can run the 40.
a straight speed-based athlete,
She's up there,
like Coleman,
finish
who's
line.
got the world
I'm gonna
record
get
in the
there first.
60, is that their technique is so phenomenal. They are so dialed in, and I think that one thing we've got to remember when some people will say, like, oh, speed can't be taught, and go to other 40-yard dash. I'm confused what that means, Jason. I know that wasn't the record, but I wanted to show Christian Coleman. One of the things that I think we forget is that speed can be taught. It can be learned. It's a skill. The movement patterns out of the start matter. How you transition through acceleration matter. And that's also where some of the benchmarks that we're going to test are going to help you. If you have a terrible single leg squat or a terrible front squat, you probably start very, very poorly, and you probably accelerate very poorly. Okay, and we know that if you've got a good vertical, but your single leg sucks and your front squat sucks, we can probably get some really good speed out of that. So that's some of the stuff to bring up. Now, here's Xavier Worthy. He'd run a 4.25. He just broke the combine record this year, and he's a type of receiver. He's at Texas. He sort of reminds me of Devontae Smith.
Here he goes.
So fast. One thing I wanted to point out is I feel like he stays pretty squatty until right around 2025. He's pretty squatty here, and then he starts to open up right there. And just really, really hammers home. And I think what's interesting is that if you watch how he's running and see he's a bit squatty there, which is honestly perfectly fine. I think some people would complain that that's not good. I think it's a great position that he's holding right there in that position. Some people will complain or say that there's all these different ways to run. But one thing I've learned, even just from studying some of the stuff that Dan Paff puts out there is like, there's pretty much a consistent model for how everyone's going to run. Like there's some intricate details that might vary here to there with different people, but you compare Xavier Worthy to the way Christian Coleman runs, and it's like, okay, I mean, even to the best O linemen, some of the linemen this year ran like one of them I think ran like a 4.89, and you start to see it. It's like they're all going to run pretty similar, right? Maybe some of the details aren't entirely identical, but you're going to see these positions be pretty consistent. Okay, coming out of that, you're going to see something like this when they're in flight time, right? You're going to see that on toe off. This position is going to be pretty consistent on toe off. You can see, pretty, I wish it was a little bit higher quality, but you're going to see those positions be pretty similar, okay? I'm going to see if we can see a grounded position there. Another toe off. That to me is going to be like the quintessential toe off position that you're going to see right there. So I think these are some important things to remember, especially as someone like Worthy is getting to top end speed. The position that you're looking at on the screen, if you're on YouTube, is going to be pretty commonplace, especially, even if you're watching the races on the track from like 45 to 90 meters. Okay, so I think that's just something that we've got to remember. That's, and then he runs a 4.21 is what it ends up being.
Keep going.
Okay, so he if I remember correctly, he tied that with John Ross, if I have that remembered correctly. Now we're going to get into some of the vertical jump. Now this is where, and I don't remember 100%, but Randy Moss, I'm assuming, ran a blazing 40. Randy Moss or Adam Archuleta ran like a 4.37. Adam Archuleta ran a 6.37 in the 3-cone, which is ungodly fast, and a 3.83 in the shuttle, which is out of this world. And if I remember, Chris Chambers, who was a receiver for the Dolphins back in the day, I think he might have been a triple jumper or a jumper at Wisconsin as well. I think he went to Wisconsin. He had like a 45-inch vertical. But when we watch verticals like this, now he is on a mat, so it's going to be a little bit, probably slightly high. And I wish that there was some consistency with the combine stuff. So we use a mat here at Garage Strength. I think they should start using a mat or a force plate with some type of touch point as well, because I think some guys get thrown off by the touch point, so then they have a decrease in their jump. I think some athletes can cheat the mat a little bit if they raise their knees, so we also have to educate athletes on how to ground properly. But let's just check this out.
7-1. Got you for 46 this morning, Josh. Let's beat that. You went 47-1. Jump. Wide receiver, 6'2", 203. What? What?
47-1.
How about 47-1 in the times right there? 7-1 in the times. What? Wide receiver, 6'2".
So notice, and I'm going to give you guys a nice little cheat code here, is that when he goes here, okay, and I'm going to try and slow this down for you on the playback speed if we get down to like this point. Okay, one of the things you can think about, so that what we're testing with our Pro Day guys right now is, okay, and you can do this with a bound, and you could do this with a vertical jump. And if you actually notice here with Josh, he's actually elevated, I think, off of that. So he's trying to create a pretty big stretch here. Some athletes will have a fast counter movement. Some of them will have a longer counter movement, okay, a deeper counter movement. So it's really, really dependent upon the athlete, their strength, how twitchy they are. So his counter movement, look how deep that chest is. Now he's still about 45 degrees there. Pretty quick out of that. Now, you notice how his arm swing, after he drives through, he does a circle with that arm swing. Just by doing that circle, that is going to help you on the vert. That's going to help you be balanced. That was absolutely insane how long he's up there. It's like he just sits there. Absolutely insane. Now, one thing I would say is, like, when you're watching someone do a vert on the mat, I think it's just it's a little bit easier on the mat because you're not focused on trying to change and alter your torso angle and touch. And I just want to point that out there. I just want to throw that out there. Now, there was a couple 12-foot broad jumps, and we've had reaction on Peak Strength to this one from Byron Jones. There was a couple insane broad jumps this year that were over 12 feet, and I think that, again, people don't realize what this takes. And I want to try and slow this down a little bit here, where you guys are going to see, what that depth, what the counter movement is. You can see he's starting to change that counter movement and see how he's getting just below 90. Okay, so he's getting just below 90, but now the interesting part to remember is that when he gets below 90, okay, he changes the shin angle. The shin angle helps him project forward on that jump, and he's timing. Notice with the vertical jump what his arm swing was like. Notice now with Byron Jones what his arm swing is like here, and then that's going to help him extend. And what's very similar here, outside of the arm swing with the vert, is also it's a bilateral. To me, it's a bilateral representation of the toe-off position when you're sprinting. So if we can just sort of take the Xavier Worthy image of him at toe-off at around that 40 mark, and then you start to look at the toe-off position from the 47-inch vert. Now you're looking at Byron Jones' toe-off position here. They're all pretty similar, and what we're looking at specifically here is that shin angle change after that counter movement. Then we come through, okay, and then we're here. So it's a little bit different with the arms on the broad in relative comparison to the vert. But that's the fact that he just sticks that. Like, I'm not sure that anyone can really comprehend what that's like. You get guys jumping 10 feet, and that's a good jump. Okay, that's a great jump. This dude extends that by freaking 2 more feet, and it's absolutely wild. Like, it's not something that is normal. Now you can see here he's going with that touch point on the vert. Extends. Big touch. See, even there, I think he would have had on the vert, I think he could have had like another inch or two, probably another inch on the vert. He didn't hit at his highest point. That's my problem with the touch point versus the mat, but I like them both. I think they're both tests that are solid as long as they're consistent. The interesting part about a touch point is you can manipulate your body on the rotation to get higher, theoretically relative to your center of mass, whereas you can also manipulate your body on the mat. So a lot of people will sort of complain about both. They both have their pros and cons. This dude over here on the side is just really taking it all in. Now, let's check out this bench record, 49 reps on the combine. We did have Earl Valls who did 46 last weekend. I will say that. So let's check this out.
Go and John as the weight. And that's Stephen Paya of Oregon State.
Stephen Paya, Oregon State.
We got a live one.
Lock it out.
Nice. Good job, son. Good job.
Let's go.
I always wonder how they determine the lockout, because it's like, it's interesting because you don't want to fully lock out, but also when you get really fatigued, you tend to lock out and go bone on bone.
That's it, son.
So it's a real interesting dilemma where it's like, okay, some guys will shortchange the range of motion, but in turn that can hurt them long term later on in the rep out. So then you have to get to a point where your body sort of communicates to you, like, okay, now do some pauses. And the reason why you're pausing is to help to recruit more high threshold motor units when you're pausing there and you're under a massive amount of fatigue. So
That's a new combine record at 49.
49.
There you go, Hoss.
49. So pretty crazy, pretty like absolute crazy movements there. And then we're going to get into some of those research papers, but you guys asked some questions. What would be most important test besides a single leg squat to see where your athlete stacks up against the other best athletes in the country at their weight class? I think with something like a weight class, what's up, Tai G? I see you in there. With a weight class sport, I think some of the best things to do, if you could compare, would be a pull-up is going to test that relative strength. Pull-up rep out is going to test that relative strength. So if we're looking specifically at football, or at wrestling, sorry, if we're looking at wrestling, single leg squat will help. Clean pound for pound strength will help. Pull-up pound for pound. Pull-up rep out is going to help. So I think there's a couple different methods that you can use. That's sort of where I would go. Now let's go into some of these research papers, because we've gotten people to ask, like, yo, can you give me some real specific information around vertical jump training? And there's some decent papers on it. There's not a ton. What's up, Jeff? What's up, Joe? I just called you Jeff. Jesus. Joe Frontier is in the Instagram chat, but he's not on YouTube. We got to get him over on YouTube. So if we're looking at improving the vertical jump, right? So we've got Gomez here broke down training methods to improve vertical jump performance. And basically what they ended up doing, this is an interesting one where they took, okay, let's take plyometric training, let's take weight training, let's take whole body vibration training, and then myostimulation training, okay? So they go, okay, plyos, weights, vibration, and then electromyostimulation. And basically, plyometric training, if we think about it, enhances muscular force, rate of force development. So earlier when we talked about some of the physiological tests that can help you, okay, out of this book, you start to think through things. And I think it's important that we all when we're breaking down the purpose of a test, outside of looking at the actual investment in your own training, I think it's important to also look at what do the specific things do. So if plyometric training is going to enhance muscular force, rate of force development, muscular power, contraction speed, blah, 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 all those things, right? Muscle stiffness as well. Then we can look at weight training. So why are we going to lift weights? Okay, so based off of research, weight training is going to increase muscular force. Weight training is going to increase velocity. So we know back squats, things like that, will improve our sprint speed. It does. Back squat. And we've got the papers to show you. Right here is something on vertical jump, though. We can go into the acceleration stuff later. Weight training is also going to improve your power output, your rate of force development during a jump on a force plate. So if your rate of force development goes up, so does your impulse expression. That's key for athleticism, muscular hypertrophy, and neurological adaptations. One of the most effective methods to improve vertical jump is the combination of plyometric training with weight training. This takes advantage of the enhancement of maximal dynamic force through weight training and the positive effects of plyometric training and what it can do to type 2 muscle fibers. So essentially, in summary, scientific evidence suggests the best way to improve vertical jump production or vertical jump performance is through the combination of plyometric training and weight training. And there's actually a paper here where we can start to see things. And so this is like my favorite thing to do is you can start to break down. You can start to look at a paper like this, and you can start to really look at, okay, what's the effects of eccentric contraction duration on muscle strength, power production, vertical jump, soreness. You can start to see difference in depths of counter movements and what that means. Short-term periodization models to improve these things. So you can really start to dive deep. But then we can look at, okay, if we're training somebody specifically for the combine, okay, and you think about Christian Coleman, and that's where this paper is going to come in. Does max speed, so we know somebody like Christian Coleman, we know somebody like Usain Bolt, right? We know that these two have absurdly high top-end speed. So one of the big questions then becomes, and this is from Ken Clark, who actually I think is at, I'm pretty sure Ken Clark is at Westchester, which is actually nearby. So if we're going to analyze top-end speed of someone like Usain Bolt, someone like Christian Coleman, then we can come up with this analysis and say, does that correlate to acceleration? Okay, so does that correlate to, if we're in a 40, we're never truly going to get to that top-end speed. You know, we might by like 35 or 40, but we're never really, we're just accelerating our mass the entire time. But if we work that max speed, does that carry over to acceleration? Okay, so we got to really, I'm hoping that makes sense. I'm trying to break that down. And then Keist had a good question there. Why is vertical jump even important? Does it actually transfer to a sport like boxing or basketball? Or it does transfer to basketball, but not necessarily to boxing. And I would echo, I'm going to go back to that paper to answer Keith's question here. But first, let's get into this. Essentially, what Ken Clark ended up doing is breaking down speeds in the 40, split times and intervals and stuff at different points. And the results indicated that maximum velocity was strongly correlated with sprint performance across 9.1 meters, which is 10 yards. No, I guess that would be a little bit. Yeah, 9.1 is 10 yards. 18.3 and then 36.6. So 10 yards, 20 yards, and 40 yards. However, both fast and slow groups accelerated in a similar pattern relative to max velocity. So the acceleration patterns were very similar, but max velocity does correlate to faster times at the 10 and at the 20. We can conclude that maximum velocity is critical as importance to the 40-yard dash. They're saying 36.6 meter time. And in conclusion, of more max velocity training may be warranted for athletes preparing for the NFL Combine. And I want to bring up, Ty G was in the chat earlier. I believe that there is evidence here, anecdotally from my own group, where we worked with, Taiji going through using like wickets to show positive trends, taking a wicket training, helping them transition from acceleration to top end speed, and then holding that top end speed. Something like wicket training, or even just longer sprints as a 60, can correlate and help improve the 40 time. The only argument I would make, and this is not against this study, the only argument I would make is that if you're training for a pro day or a combine versus if you're in high school, you have a shorter time frame to really develop that acceleration or develop that top end speed. More so, I believe that you can develop acceleration genuinely faster in a short-term time frame. Okay, so in like a 10 to 12 week time frame, I think the best low-hanging fruit is going to be acceleration. I'm not saying you shouldn't train max velocity. I just think it's a little bit easier up front. So I did want to share that. Now, I did want to also share, there's a little plug for you guys. If you guys like these conversations, you want to get more in depth, we do a lot of these talks on our Garage Strength podcast. Make sure you're subscribed to our Garage Strength podcast. We have a couple lives over there. Oh, actually, we have lives from our podcast here. And we are doing more lives where we're going to try and show workouts that we have with athletes and then share those workouts with you. Most of them, full disclosure, will not truly be live. They will be recorded and then posted as a live. But I want to post them as lives because they're going to be really long workouts. And it's just like a good snapshot into what we're doing in training. I did want to share that with you guys. So it's like some of those lives, they might just be a workout, but it's the real workout of what's going on. And I think it's cool to see a real workout. It's cool to see our YouTube videos. It's cool to see our short form, but the real workouts are really what is important to me. So for you guys to actually learn from. Now, Keith had asked a question, right, around vertical jump, and is it applicable to like a combat sport? And what I want to go back to in this paper here, and this is where we need to remember, Keith, is that if we look at vertical jump plyometric training, right? Okay, so if we think about power output is correlated to a big vertical jump, okay? Storage and release of elastic energy correlates to a big vertical jump. Muscular contraction velocity. Okay, so if we think about muscular contraction velocity, and to Keith's point, he's saying, is the vertical jump going to correlate to a sport like combat sports? Well, if we think about plyometric training, or if we think about weight training, and we see an increase in a vertical jump, theoretically we should, as long as this athlete who's in a combat sport like kickboxing or something like that, we should see a correlation to their striking capacity. If they can express force faster on a vertical jump mat, and their vertical jump goes up, their global speed of recruitment will be more rapid at a higher tempo. And in turn, when that's higher, their ability to knock somebody out or move faster, or be a little bit shiftier think about a wrestler changing direction and taking a faster shot. Now, all of a sudden, that vertical jump can correlate to a quicker shot or to a quicker striking ability. There's even a paper that we're going to go into on peak strength. I think it's in May that we're releasing this video on the back squat actually correlates to a faster or harder kick for Muay Thai fighters. So even a movement as general as a back squat will help you in a sport like combat sports. So I hope that clarifies that, because I think that it's a great question, Keith, that you provided. And also Keith did just mention too, he did like the workout videos. He just wanted a little bit more context on it. I think that makes sense. And I think that for us, it's like if we could just, once a month or once a week do, probably once a month, I would bet, or maybe a little bit more. We'd have to talk with Jason and Earl whenever we do those lives. Oh shoot, I'm still over on the, I'm showing you guys there we go. I think it's just important to clarify those lives are pre-recorded, so you do know that, but they're just like, they're recorded live. Now, sometimes we might be saying things like swear words and stuff like that. Sometimes there's copywritten music, which happened on the last one. So we just started doing them. I hope you guys enjoy them, because I thought it would be, something that is, you can pull some things away that's more of like the nuance realm, and you're going to get nuance in our videos, and then you're also going to get some more general stuff. But it's like taking these books and making it more practical for everybody. So let me know what you think about that, and then we're going to head into some questions here. So I did notice that not even track athletes are within 0.1 seconds of a sub 40, though. The only thing I'll say there is that this is for Andrew. I have heard through the grapevine that Justin Gatlin ran like a 3.95. I've heard through the grapevine that is accurate, and he actually did it supposedly with like the Texans in a tryout. Like I don't know if it's 100% accurate, but my understanding is that it has actually happened. So let me know, let me know what you think about that. I'm going to try and get into baseball. Has exit velocity, pop time, throwing speed across the mound, but for wrestlers, what athletic markers would you focus on? I think exit velocity is a great one for baseball. I do. I really think that. I think speed of their throwing. I think for wrestling, there's a couple things that you could do. I think dynamic grip strength could have a play. I think if there was some way to measure, like, I've always thought a depth drop into a bound is a great one for a wrestler, because I think about like changing your level, taking a double leg. I think it could correlate pretty well. I think it would correlate almost directly. Now, one thing I want to bring up is that in a lot of tests, and this is sort of along the lines of what Keith was bringing up, a lot of athletes or a lot of people on the outside will be like, well, what's that sports-specific transfer? And we think it has to be like exactly the same. And I'm sort of riffing off of a video that we filmed yesterday where, in the book Super Training, which I have over on my desk, so I can bring that into the discussion. But in the book Super Training, or even like, some of the other stuff here this is probably one of the greatest books ever written. Okay. From Paavo Komi. And if we would even, I'll just try and, I'll take a little risk here, but if we even think about something like dynamic correspondence, okay? So if we look at when what people think about, they don't actually they have dynamic exercise, Duchenne muscular dystrophy. They actually don't have dynamic correspondence. But when individuals are thinking about dynamic correspondence, they think that means that there has to be like this perfect carryover. Like it has to be exactly, the movement has to be the exact pattern, right? And I think that that's an error. I think that when you're looking at dynamic correspondence, as long as there's angles that are similar, the muscles are the same muscles, the speeds can be similar, there's going to be correspondence. So like a bench press is a good example. If I'm laying on my back, people will be like, oh, well, the bench press doesn't correlate because the bench press is done on your back. Well, ironically, it does correlate because of correspondence, because of things like that. And because of the fact that the muscles are going to be the same, the speed of contraction is going to be similar. There's going to be, like, your brain has a capability to respond from the training. Like, okay, so if I'm doing something on my back, bench pressing, when I stand up and I run full speed and I throw a stiff arm, my brain's capability is, it knows its orientation. So when you're on your back, the orientation of your brain is all that matters, like your body's awareness. And I think that's, a good example is that's why somebody who is like a gymnast, they have an absurd level of body awareness. So if they train in certain positions, it does correlate really well. benchmarks for rugby sevens. That's a great question. I think that the biggest thing that I see with rugby sevens is just that they're going to be, I honestly think I'd have to research this, but I'm almost positive they run more than soccer players. So that would be an interesting part. Now, the other aspect is their speed has to be ungodly high, like very, very, very high. John Ramsey, what's up, dude? So if you're going to be really, if you're focusing on rugby sevens, I would focus more on things like a 40, a single leg squat for 5 reps, a broad jump, and then I would start to look at something like 1 minute or a 5-minute test on an assault bike, or a 5K run is another good one. You know, sports like lacrosse and soccer will use a 5K test because it does transfer well. But then what I would do is I would create like a 40 as their speed test and a shuttle as their speed test, and then I would have a ratio created between the 40 and the 5K. And then I think that's like a really good way to go about proper testing to improve those things. So I think that's how I would look at those benchmarks for the rugby sevens. What would Randy Moss again? That's a good question. Okay, Demetrius just said, what about using a crane scale for isometric? Okay, so isometric testing. There's actually isometric testing I find to be decent. I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I think oftentimes it's not the best in the sense that, and there's even a point in this book, the physiological test book, where they actually talk about they don't think it's the greatest means because some people just know that it can't happen, that you can't move something, so then they sort of back off on the test. I think it's sort of, yeah, I don't even know if you would really necessarily need for a mid-thigh pull for testing. Like, as a strength coach, I mean, somebody tell me this, because I know somebody's going to bring up, like, reactive strength index, and we're going to talk about all that stuff, and it's going to be like, oh, I don't think you have to, as a strength coach, test isometric strength in certain positions. Like, I think it's important to be aware of it. I've never tested, like, in an actual clinical setting. You know, I've had athletes tested with their isometric strength. Haley, Jake, Jordan, you know, top weightlifters were tested. But, like, did it really change what we were doing in training? Not really. So, like, do you have to do it? I would argue no. I would argue in most of these cases, it's like we need a more comprehensive profile versus like something like force velocity. Like, dude, the force velocity is just telling you what you probably already know as the coach. Whereas if you're getting like a more comprehensive test that shows you like, here's your strength, here's your speed, here's your endurance, here's where there's some glaring weaknesses, this is the way you need to go. Like, I think that's some of the things that we need to do. Keith just asked me, will you visit some of the high-end performance centers like the UFC Performance Center? So in 2020, here's a really crazy story for you. In 2020, I think the guy's name is Duncan Atwood, if I remember correctly, English guy, or Irish maybe. He's there. He's at the Performance Center at the UFC Performance Center. And he's written very, very successful sports scientist and strength coach. And so where I'm going with this is that I was working with the Chinese sprint cyclists, the Chinese sprint cycling team. So I was working with them. Okay, this is early 2020, end of 2019. I was writing their programming probably from like October through February. Okay. They come to the U.S. after the World Championships. 2 of their girls medal, get bronze at the World Championships. They go to the UFC Performance Center. I'm working with their coach, who's an American, who I tend to know. We're talking about their training. Duncan comes on, and what ends up happening is I'm writing their training, and I'm talking to Duncan on the phone because he's going to be implementing their training, meaning he's just going to take what I have written out, and then talk and go through everything, okay? COVID hits. They were about to fly me out to Vegas to be there for about 2 weeks with their team. COVID hits. They're outside of China at this time. COVID hits, and they're trying to figure out, should they stay in the country, in the United States, or should they go back home? And like half the team just started to lose their mind that like we might not get home. Like we might be stuck here in the States. So they, I guess, started to like semi-protest with the coaches, and the coaches decided like, yo, let's get them out of here because there were so many question marks. You know, fast forward 4 weeks, and they probably would have been stuck in the U.S., and they ended up leaving and getting back. So, and then what was even crazier is that the coach that I was linked with, because they shut everything down, he ended up having to stay in China for like almost like over a year before he could leave to come back. So it's just a crazy conversation. Now, I've been to the Olympic training centers. I've been to a lot of these high performance centers, Keith, so I have a decent understanding of how those things work. Any other questions from you guys? I hope this is a pretty in-depth conversation around sport tests. I think when you're looking at like athleticism, benchmarks, you know, there's a couple different things that we got to think about. If we're testing athletes, one, we're testing to see where they're at in their sport. So we should have benchmarks for their specific sport and for their sport type. Two, so that's what we're testing for first. Two, we want to test them to see where they're at in their career. Are they novice, intermediate, advanced? We've got to understand all those areas, right? Because that also plays a role. Three, we want to look at it as a test for an investment. Where do we need to invest more time? Potentially money if we're an NFL team, right? Where do we want to invest? And then four, we need to look at where are they in the grand scheme of everything relative to, you know, where are they in the grand scheme of everything relative to their yearly training cycle? Are they about to peak? You know, are they about to have preparation? So there's a lot of different factors that have to go into testing, into all of these different aspects to just make everybody a better athlete. So I hope that helped with your overall understanding. I hope to see you guys soon. Until next time, peace.